fundraising at this moment, I understand, especially international organizations, is not allowed in China. However, donation, when through certain channels, can be done. So what about this second reading of the charity law in China? To what scale and what extent can it change the situation?
Well, it says that this actually, compared to the first reading, it's a little bit of withdrawn. Because
withdraw in terms of what?
Listen to me. It says that the charity organization or the charity trustee, it means only to public trustee. So, to those persons who want to make
individuals rather,
they want to make the charity trust, they may be wait for some time, or actually they could be a kind of change for today, because today the today the NPC is actually
discussing this.
Discussing and vote
right. This
for
is
it.
the reading of it. This is not the final product because it really needs the approval of the National People's Congress, isn't it?
So it says that there will be some change to it. Let's just wait.
Right. Yeah. Professor Fu, go ahead. You want to say something?
My understanding of that, sort of, if you look at the area of philanthropic, what's the term? It's a charity organization. That the area, you're not just looking at the charity law, if you also look at the civil law. So one argument is that if we are dealing with private donations, and the private donations, we will have contracts. If there is a breach of a contract and there is a dispute, and the dispute should be resolved in civil laws.
And you know what, ladies and gentlemen, what we have just debated and discussed is only one minor detail of what this charity law is going to handle. In fact, it has a lot of other details.
Right.
But let me ask you, Professor Chambers, coming from the U.S. Georgetown University, from your perspective, what are you looking at when you see China working on its first charity law? What would really interest you, and what would that mean for some of the American charity organizations and others coming from all over the world?
There are basically two levels that are of interest in the United States. The first is the more general global level that causes very much excitement, because if you look at the development of the United States as an economic world power, one indication of that was the ability of regular citizens, of private donors or small companies, to engage in philanthropy and to give and to help their communities beyond what people might have done for religious practices, because the United States had churches and things like that, and the very wealthy. So once we moved beyond that, so that everybody could do that, and have that transparency through our Internal Revenue Service by registering with the Internal Revenue Service and the advantages of our tax laws, where ordinary citizens could do that. That was an indication that we were a world power. For China, it's very exciting because this charity law is an affirmation of the maturity and strength of the Chinese economy, that this is something important. Now, on the smaller or the more specific level, yes, there are charities in the United States. There are groups that want to help from everything from education to medical things like that, and the arts, that are looking upon this, and NGOs as well that are based in the United States that are very interested in this and are looking forward to the registration process, because it will make it easier for them.
Yes,
It'll
indeed,
make it
Professor.
easier for them
You
to partner with Chinese sources.
Yeah, you mentioned several important parts, but before we go back to talk specifically about those parts, let's play a quote I got last time from the earlier Davos Forum in Switzerland. Charity, in fact, in the West is much more developed when it comes to legal framework than in China. Earlier at the Davos meeting, I talked to Bill Gates, who of course is the co-founder of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. The former tech giant is doing equally well now in philanthropy. He shared his views on the development of charity in China. Let's take a look. Wonderful suggestions of establishing Institute of Philanthropy and Research, and also talent raising. Anything that you want to share more inspiration with us about that?
Well, it's you get people who are very successful, they have to decide what their values are. Do they want to give a significant of that money back to help their country or to help the world? And whether that's funding research or helping out people with special needs, there's so many wonderful causes. And that habit, now that China has such a successful economy, I think will develop. I think it'll be fantastic. I think it'll have some similarities to U.S. philanthropy, but it'll have its own nature as well. And I'm always glad when I'm in China to talk to people who are thinking about that. And I see a lot of interest and a lot of progress.
That's Bill Gates. I talked to him earlier at the Davos Economic Forum in Switzerland. He is, of course, very familiar with the Chinese situation. He came here several times every year, talked to the philanthropic community here. But one thing is very important. There are two things when we talk about philanthropy, whether a new law is the best choice. It has to be functional, first of all. Secondly, whether it is going to encourage the spirit of giving, encourage the spirits of philanthropy. So two functions. Let's talk about the first one, function. Earlier, we mentioned just some minor details already created a lot of debate in the studio. Let's talk about transparency. Will this law give much better chance of transparency of charities in China? Whether for those who are donating, or those who receive the donation, or those who are soliciting the donation, this is going to be very important.
Right.
How is the system going to be like, Ms. Ran, with this new law?
Because it has a very certain chapter called the public of the information. It asks every charity organization make publication of their annual report, of their including the account, of some other informations. If they violate this publication, this rule, they will be fined very strongly. So
but the thing is, who is going to monitor that? Because if you ask an organization just to publish information about themselves, well, they can just do anything and play with a number. The thing is, who is going to be there to monitor that, make sure everything is as it is?
The Civil Affairs Department will be the main part in charge
the
of
Ministry of Civil Affairs?
Yes.
Is that the
And-
department
and
that's likely
each
to
content.
monitor every number that this the charity organization going to put out in their annual report?
Well, the charity organization have the obligation to make all the things public. But if they didn't do that, and if they were found, they will be fined very seriously. And well, actually, originally we had a kind of lawmaking that they said that every public interest group can delegate those who were harmed to make the suit to the court. But it's a pity that this one is cancelled from our draft.
Transparency, very important.
Tianwei, you mentioned, and also Bill Gates mentioned that the word encourage, to encourage private citizens to give.
Let's talk about the function first, Professor, before we
I
go
mean,
to the
well,
encouragement. So the
encourage-
function
because
is the
legally-
first priority
no,
of a law.
Legally, I read the words, there is another function that encourages private citizens to give. Now, if you look at the registration, approval registration system, the previous framework that guiding Chinese philanthropy work is primarily driven by administrative fiat. It's not a legal framework.
Right.
So that is very ad hoc. You want to incorporate an organization for non-profit services, you have to wait for the government to approve. But
That is the registration problem.
It's-
That's the registration charity challenge I'm talking about right now, the transparency. So when it comes to transparency, Professor, you are a professor of governance. I have to ask you this. A lot of different ministries and organizations involved in the second reading, the draft of the second reading. As far as I know, the Ministry of Public Security, in charge of security situation in China, the Ministry of Civil Affairs, just as Professor Ran mentioned, and also the administration, state administration of taxation in charge of certification and administration, registration of non-governmental organizations are also involved. These are only a few of the ministries or ministry level organization likely to be involved in the second reading, but the whole picture is much more complicated than that. And that's why I'm asking about transparency. When you have...
May I?
Yeah, sure. Let me ask this question to Professor Fu before I go to you.
I was going to say, I mean...
Let me ask this question to Professor Fu. So when you have so many organizations, government departments involved, it's one thing to share this important responsibility, but it's also another thing to make sure everybody work on their turf so that the whole project can really serve the purpose. Professor Fu, a professor of governance, your views here.
Now, if you look at this piece of law, you see what I would call 5 building blocks. The first one is the building block for registration. This is the jurisdiction that belongs to Civil Affairs Department. From the township level all the way up to the central level. The second is the fundraising.
Right.
Potentially that will involve criminal acts, so your public security, how to do fundraising. And the third one is at the operation level, who is there to supervise, right? And well, many people want to donate, and don't forget, they also want to have a tax reduction.
So the thing is coordination. Professor Chambers, how does that work in your system?
Well, what I was going to say is that you have the good and bad in America. You have the good in that you have a centralized agency, which would be our Internal Revenue Service, and then to some extent, smaller tax agencies in the states, in the individual states. The IRS keeps a very good tab on this in terms of functionality. The problem is that if you look at the United States tax code, I mean, just the section pertaining to charitable donations, not-for-profits, fundraising, it could take up a few, giant CDs. I mean, there are whole walls of these volumes. So that's the problem. And
you have a price to pay for transparency.
Yes, you do. I mean, and I think that's a thesis that China needs to really explore. There is a price to pay for transparency. It's a good price, but it's still a price, and people have to be vigilant and understand that in terms of the functionality going into it. Now, I mean, I don't think things will get as complex as people might fear in terms of the functionality, but it's still something that China must be watchful for, because you don't want to get into a situation as you have in the United States.
Right. I have to ask Ms. Ran another question.
Like a spider web.
What about tax deduction? That is a crucial issue because charitable organizations, they cannot at this moment registered as charitable organizations a lot of times, and they don't get tax deduction. And that's why people do not feel encouraged. Even despite of that, a lot of people still contribute. Charitable organizations still work their way for the best. How much of that is going to change with this new law?
It is actually already changed. You know that before this law, we can, the charity organizations could only have tax deduction for just 1 year. But with this year, if they could do it, they could do it for the later 3 years. It says that it could be carried forward for the later 3 years. Although this is actually a breakthrough to the current law, we may need more long way to go to make this settled. But it is already a breakthrough. We must admit it. We of course we all need what we call a good law, but we have it's a long way for the historical.
It's a gradual process.
Yes, yeah.
China is talking about.
So I think we should be patient, and we should take a look of the better ones.